So we're going to start the second half of our program with a piece that is near and dear to my heart, and a piece that puts fear into Ethan's heart. One of the things that's great about this guy is, beside the fact that he's been my dearest friend for over 3 decades, going on 4, is that from a musical point of view, we inspire each other to continue to do better and different things. And as we go through and we discovered so much of Astor Piazzolla's music, who incidentally, as far as we know, only wrote one piece originally for piano and cello. The rest of his pieces were written for quintet, sextet, septet, etc. So we have done our own original arrangements, piano and cello. And we get into these phases where I think each is trying to outdo the other. And he put a score in front of me that I think had notes on the bottom of the keyboard, notes on the top of the keyboard, and a few here in the middle, which I guess were intended for me to play with my nose. So my response was the next piece, Esqualo. I fell in love with this piece because it has more time signature and meter changes than any other piece that I'm familiar with. So it goes from 4/4 to 5/4 to 2/4, 3/4, 7/8. And so we sort of nicknamed this piece the Pianist's Revenge. Esqualo means shark, and allegedly Piazzolla was inspired to write this piece one summer when he was vacationing and would watch the sharks in the water and their sort of erratic behavior and their twists and their turns, and he tried to capture that musically. So, at the risk of being cruel to Ethan, we're going to start the second half with Esqualo.
So Carl called me while he was arranging that piece at 11 at night. That's never good. His question for me was, Ethan, what's the highest note the cello can go to? And I told him a note, and what he didn't know at the time, in those days I was mostly performing the tango music on an electric cello. So I play an electric cello, it's made by Yamaha, and it sounds so good on these tangos. It almost sounds like a shark slithering through the water. But I didn't want to use the electric cello for pieces like Schindler's List. And so this cello was actually flown here by Ivo. This is my baby. I never travel with it. Brought it here especially for you guys tonight. It was made in 1885 in France, a one-of-a-kind cello. And I'm sure that the maker would be rolling in his grave listening to me play that piece.
Almost as old as me. You guys need a rest for that? So, what's the connection between tango and Yiddishkeit? Anybody know the connection? Tango and Jewish music? So Carl told you a little bit about Buenos Aires. The tango actually started in the brothels of Buenos Aires. And this was in the late 1800s. And who were the performers, the musicians that played in those brothels? They came over from Eastern Europe, and they were klezmer players. So there was this rich cross-fertilization of Eastern European klezmer and Buenos Aires tango. And so Yiddish tango is extremely popular in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Very rich history of Yiddish tango. So if you're interested, it's a wonderful history. This piece, Freeling, is probably the best known of the tangos, although it was composed much later, by a man who lost his wife. She perished in the Vilna ghetto. And he wrote this piece along with someone else who also perished. So, and the very good version of this is by Carl Algermissen. I think this is where you got the version from.
That was the inspiration.
Yeah, that was the inspiration. So I hope you enjoy this.
Von Gessel zu Gessel und kann nicht gefinnen kein Ort. Nicht da ist mein Lieber, wie trocknen a Rieber, Menschen aus Okotja Wort. Es läuft auf mein Heim ist der Himmel der Bläuer, oh, schlepp mich jetzt der Fuhr. Ich steh wie ein Bettler bei jedem Teuer und bettel a bissel so. Frühling, nimm zu mein Treue und bring mein Liebst ein Neuen zurück. Auf deine Flügel ohne mein Herz mit und gib es auf mein Glück. Auf deine Flügel ohne mein Herz mit und gib es auf mein Glück. Ich geh zu der Arbeit vorbei, unser Stiefel in Treuer, der Teuer vermacht. Der Tag hat zerhält die Blumen verwelkt, sie weinen vor Seesucht Nacht. Vor Nacht
vergessen jeder Treue, und da hast du liebster gewahrt. Und da in den Schotten argentik dein Trotz ist, fleckst kuschen mit lieblich und zart. Frühling, nimm zu mein Treue und bring mein Liebst, mein Treuen zurück. Frühling, auf deine Flügel bläue, ohne mein Herz mit und gib es auf mein Blick. Frühling, auf deine Flügel bläue, ohne mein Herz mit und gib es auf mein Blick. Frühling, auf deine Flügel bläue, ohne mein Herz mit und gib es auf mein Blick.
Not to confuse things too much, but we thought we'd throw some classical music in the mix. This is a piece by Ernest Bloch. Many may be familiar with it, many not. This piece is in 3 movements depicting different aspects of what Bloch perceived as Jewish life. To me, it sounds like 2 weeks ago, and every time I play this, I feel like I need to start fasting. But it's absolutely gorgeous music. We hope you like it. Again, it's in 3 movements.
So one of our goals, as we talked about preparing to spend this afternoon with you today, was to try to convey how different musical styles can intertwine with one another and create entirely new forms of music. And we've talked about how traditional tango grew to nuevo tango. We've explored the Jewish music and the klezmer sounds. And next, we're going to do a piece that we think kind of brings it all together. The program says it's called Milonga Picaresque, I like to call it tango stew. Astor Piazzolla was born in Buenos Aires, but he spent a lot of time living in New York. And when he was in New York, when he would go to practice with his musical groups, his daily walk would take him through the Jewish quarter, and he would hear these sounds of the klezmer bands coming out through the windows and the open doors in the summertime. And I was fascinated to read this in his biography because he was inspired by these rhythms and these notes and the way that the musicians, especially like on clarinet, would slide into notes. And his biographer says that he was determined to try to infuse some of that klezmer sound into his tango sound and to see what would result. And what resulted was Milonga Picaresque. Picaresque roughly sort of implies rascally or mischievous. And I think it was his idea that taking all these different rhythms and beats and things would be kind of a mischievous thing to do. And on top of it, he put in some jazz and some improvisations, which you'll hear about halfway through the piece. So, Milonga Picaresque.
Thank you.
Now this next piece, Heal Us Now, this is a piece that I sang with my choir back in Denver at the synagogue, and many of you have probably heard this piece. It's sung around the country and around the world. It's by Leon Scher, who is a composer, cantor, choir director on the East Coast. And Ethan, I think a couple of years ago when he heard this, and he heard the choir doing it, it's usually done with cantor and choir and maybe with piano or organ. He thought, I could do this for cello and piano and voice. So this is an original arrangement by Ethan, a very inspiring piece. Hope you enjoy it.
Adonai v'nei rafeh,
Well, it's hard to tell where the Jewish music ends and the tango begins, right? Again, I just want to take a moment and thank everybody here. It means so much to Carl and I that you guys would sell out this auditorium and come out and hear us play. Would have been real sad to fly all the way from Denver and have an empty auditorium. So thank you so much. I mean that from the bottom of our hearts. This was a real special day for Carl and I to bring all this music from Denver to you. And we're going to close up our program with a piece that kind of started it all again for Carl and I. We recorded our first CD, gosh, almost 15 years ago. And then it took us a while to find our way back to Astor Piazzolla, and this piece kind of brought us back. If you've ever heard of Astor Piazzolla, then this would be the piece you would know, Libre Tango, or Free Tango. Piazzolla had a mild stroke, and his doctors told him to take it easy, and he responded by writing this. So for me, this represents freedom, freedom with music, freedom with your soul, and I hope you enjoy Libre Tango. one more. Let's do it like this, no? For those still here, we're going to do one extra piece for you. Received a tough phone call yesterday. My wife's grandmother, Rowena, passed away while we were flying here. Her 99th birthday would have been next week. This piece is Oblivion, and I'd like to dedicate it to my wife and her grandma.